very important issues. Why I highlight it right from the beginning is if you see the land use statistics from 1950 to 2023, I had a graph drawn. You could see that the forest lands increased and increased very well, but the barren land and the total barren land has declined, but the total non-agricultural land has increased. The gaucho land, fallow cultural land have all declined. And the gaucho was the most important one in the village areas, at least, which has declined from 25% around in 1955 to about 8 to 10% 21, 22. That's the latest statistics. Now, what do the data tell us? The forest lands have almost doubled, and as I just now said, that non-ag has increased, but the rest almost have secularly declined. But what is important in all the papers that we read is what is the denominator people have used. Even in the paper that we have had, the concept note, the denominator is total geographical area. Can we use it? I don't think, because this session is also about methodology, and therefore I thought let me highlight it. On the other hand, what I have used is that the total land area that is available for use. So if you take that, then the percentages slightly changes. So what happens in this is if you see why this is important, I'll take only 3 cases and then I'll highlight the issues. We completed quite a few studies on sheep breeders, and then on the Sardar project on the Narmada, and then the metro as it was put in different cities. From these, I'm trying to take some issues to highlight. The first one is the sheep breeders, if you see in the tropical areas and semi-arid areas in Gujarat and Rajasthan. They migrate every year, basically because the commons in their own areas are not identifiable. Though almost all the villages have commons, many people don't even know where they exist. Because I'll tell you what we are trying to do now, recently in the budget also, but much of it has gone into the private hands, and therefore they have to necessarily migrate long distances. When they do, in search of water and fodder, grass basically, do they get it to the gaucho land or the commons? No, they go to the private lands again. So for that, all these Maldaris, they pay almost ₹1 lakh to visit a village in cash for the sheep to graze and have access to water. How do they make this money? It is from the night folding on the private lands. So that is the only way in which this has been going on. And we know from this 2 things. One is there are gaucho lands available, but many of us could not even identify where it is. It is listed. And if you see the graph, I can't show the graph now. The graph is almost a flat line from 1950 onwards to 2022-23. Just because it's a flat line, the nuances are much higher. Because you can see the decline from 23% to 8% doesn't really show up in a graph. So that's where the thing is. Do we have enabling policies for it? Yes, we do. The 73rd Amendment, so which gave the rights to the panchayats to take care of these. But what do? They are supposed to, the rights are of twofold. One is the access to grant, use of land, and the use of rights of both forest, trees, and the grass which grows. But is it happening? We don't know. It should have happened because we had enabling policies like PIM, the Participatory Irrigation Management Program, the watershed, and the JFM. And none of them are active right now. And lastly, villages with different common land categories have different institutional templates. So which makes the community's legitimate tenure and access very difficult on these CPRs. So this is another methodological issue. How we handle it and how it has been handled administratively is a different issue, but we need to understand some of this. I'm just flagging for now. If you look at the urban commons, the next topic which I want to cover in this 5 minutes so that we can have discussions later, the urban areas are growing. not just the population, but the urban areas in most places are also growing. There has been a regret that we could see that in some of the cities where the urban water bodies have been completely covered, used as landfills, and there are monuments also. In Chennai, for example, if you see. And the urban access, there are two things we'll have to classify in this. One is the commons, and the other is the civic commons, if you put it as. So there is a big debate that rages whether we should have payments, whether we should have charges, user charges, and so on. But I'm not very much against having a user charge for it, because the operation maintenance has been one of the biggest casualties in almost all the natural resources that we have, whether it is canal or whether it is parks and so on. So, but if you take out that kind of water charges or user charges from that, then the rest of the things can we identify? We couldn't identify because, again, the difference is that we are using public lands and commons synonymously. The related aspect is we have this in Gujarat and in some other places, the TP scheme, as it is called, town planning scheme. In the town planning scheme, it is basically land banks also get created. Now, these land banks, we don't pay much. We don't pay anything at all to the landowners, to the property owners. If you see the problems in that is that the market dynamics. You know, the moment I have these kind of, it reduces the supply of the lands in the area, and therefore leading to speculation. But the speculation is twofold. It is not just that the government will sell the land and therefore the price will be determined as a floor, but you also have the infrastructure and other things which are being built on it, and therefore every property owner in Ahmedabad, at least, including me, we think that the property value will go up autonomously, not necessarily because the land that I'm occupying is very useful. I'm not necessarily blaming it because the controlled development is one of the aspects that we are talking about in a compact city if we want to compact, and I don't know how much more we can compact, but long-term planning is definitely part of it. So while this has the pros and cons, how do we view it? And this, from private, we are making public lands, and how do we use it? Where do we use it? And how the price discovery is being made, not only for these lands, but also as an impact on other private lands. These are the questions that I would like to leave you with. Some of it not necessarily that I should answer. And the last two, which again the mining and industries. These are the two major things that we use. The wasteland. Again, commons, wasteland, public are all defined almost synonymously in many reports, and therefore it is so very difficult to identify and isolate the impact and the extent of these. But be that it may, some of the studies that I have conducted along with my students and others, you could see that many of the large-scale industries have large tracts of land. I can tell examples. I mean, it's just a closed house here. The Tata Nano, for example, we have about 1,100 acres. They ask for 550, you have 1,100. Hardly 25% is built in that. So what do we do? Why do we necessarily give such large tract of land? I'm not criticizing, I'm not putting it up, but the thing is it can be used for something else. So instead of all the wastelands which are categorized as wastelands, you have this kind of allocation. Can we do it on such large scale for almost every industry that comes up is a question. If we have to do it, from where we'll get these lands? The second thing is mining. In almost all states, we have mining. In Gujarat, for example, there is so much of mining even in Kutch. Now, what happens in this, in both industries and mining, the other factor that impacts is the environmental issue, the environmental degradation. We have a book on that. So that is, you can't really call it as a collateral damage anymore because it's a direct impact that happens. And therefore, how are we taking it? Because do we have mine closure plans? We have, but does it make it as a commons? It doesn't. So what are the uses it is being put for? We'll have to talk. The last point is we have something called as the grasslands, which are managed in Gujarat by the government themselves. This is probably, it was very useful when we had so much of droughts, recurring droughts, predictably recurring droughts, and therefore these grasslands were used to have grasses kept in the government grounds, the forest department. It was administered by forest department. So we had this, but nobody is buying those grass these days. So what do you do with those lands? Who is administering it? And in different states, we have different lands like this classified. And therefore, again, in all this, what is sorely lacking are two things. One is the property rights. We have not defined the property rights, how it is. So the ways forward, if you ask me, I mean, I'm just putting the questions very clearly now. The gaucha in the rural areas, the Porambok lands, the public lands in urban areas, it's all occupied mostly in some cases by the vulnerable, we can call as encroachers. But then, are we treating them as how they are? I don't know whether we just push them out. Like I did indicate, I was doing research on this Sardar Sarovar project and including the metros. So we know the displaced families. So they become encroachers then, otherwise it is somebody else. Updating and digitalization of these land records are very important. We have started with this UL PIN, Unique Land Parcel Identification System from this. My thought is if it is linked along with the Gati Shakti platform, probably it would be more utilizable because you know where you'll have to locate the industry, which wasteland can be used. I'm not against that wasteland should not be used at all. If you can put it to use, it is good. But can we link it up with Gati Shakti and only those lands can be used? Then the property rights will be defined and it can be defined differentially. The land audits, we don't do the land audits, except probably in Kerala where the survey system resurvey is doing, ma'am knows it. But I think we'll have to do it almost all places so that only then we'll be able to do this unique land parcel identification system. Otherwise, we can't. Even if you identify the land as commons, as public, or as wasteland, after that, what? Unless we define the property rights and find out the use value of it, not the exchange value. Exchange value, we all know in the urban areas. The use value, it will be useful. And the last one is that can we codify these land categories along with, even if it is Gati Shakti on one hand, if it can be with FSI and TDR in the urban areas. So that if it is marketed, if it has to be, the price discovery will have to be there, then let us do it in a very systematic manner. I'll stop here for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Professor Parthasarathy. I think you have put most of the issues in perspective, and I think we'll go on to discuss many of them in greater detail. Can I come to you and ask you, and please focus on urban public lands, urban commons. I think that is, and you come from Bangalore, so that's very important.
Yeah, thank you. Talking about commons, I cannot miss out on the rural commons because we did fight a very big case in Karnataka, so I'll briefly share it. So first of all, commons belong to the people of the country. The government is a custodian of these commons. Article 39 of the Constitution very clearly says how the commons have to be distributed so that it does not concentrate in the hands of the few, given that commons is where livelihood happens. So with that, we also have a whole lot of principles that have been invoked by the judiciary. One is the public trust doctrine. Second is the intergenerational equity, and so many others. But these two are very important, given that commons determine the lives and livelihoods of people. The first case I would like to share is in central Karnataka, about 13,000 acres of common lands were diverted to set up a science city. And this violated a whole lot of environmental laws, the Town and Country Planning Acts, and many other laws. And these 70 villages which were around those commons, the 13,000 acres, were completely agro-pastoral lives. They did not know anything else. Everybody had anything from 5 to 10 sheep and goats to those who had 5,000 sheep as well. So their life revolved around grazing the sheep. They would have small chunks of land, and many of them didn't even have land, private land. So they grew something, there was food at the household level, grazing, shearing the wool, making the yarn, making the blankets, was all that they knew. And those blankets were used by the Indian Army, Air Force, and other places because the quality of those blankets are extremely good. But once these lands were diverted, all those communities lost their livelihoods. They did not lose their private land, so they got no compensation. And there was no way they could move on in life because, like I said, they had nothing else to do. They didn't know anything else. The youth migrated out looking for all kinds of odd jobs. They've all landed up in Bangalore, Tumkur, and other places and are caught in the gig economy. The women, senior citizens, and children are staying behind. They've all had to, there has been a distress sale of all the animals. And India is the largest producer of meat and milk. And this particular way of the sheep that was reared, there is the Deccani sheep, which is indigenous to the local community, local area. And then the cattle that was reared there was also a very indigenous variety of cattle called the Amrit Mahal cattle. And all records were fudged. And yesterday I was sharing in another forum, the district collector has the power to divert the commons, according to the Karnataka Land Revenue Act. And the numbers of cattle and sheep that are actually present were fudged and the lands were diverted. We fought that case at the National Green Tribunal. There is a report called Forfeiting Our Commons. I would urge you all to read that. There is a film made in the name of Birappa's Angst. Birappa is the animistic god of the shepherding community. I would urge you all to watch that. It's on YouTube. The NGT came out with an excellent judgment. It said all the agencies which had been granted land on the Science City cannot set it up unless they got environmental clearance. But all of these agencies thought they are above the law, and the Science City did come up. And the NGT had also said that the place is a habitat of the great Indian bustard, the black buck, and the lesser florican. So it had asked the MOF and CC to relook at the condition of the habitat and come out with a state action plan for Karnataka. And it had also recommended that, the removal of renewable energy projects from the purview of environmental clearances be revisited. But MOF did nothing about it. The state did nothing about the state climate action plan. And today, Karnataka is sad to say that it has only 2 of the last GIBs left in that area, in that spread. And we know what's happening to the GIB in the north as well. That is the story of the grasslands in central Karnataka. All the animistic temples, the little trees around which they would have these stone structures where the local people worshipped, all of that has been broken down. And one chunk of land was also given. So the agencies that got land are BARC, DRDO, ISRO, Indian Institute of Science, the Karnataka Housing Development Corporation, and a variety of other agencies as well. The risks that we take are very, mind-blowing because BARC is just next to DRDO. And we had predicted that, there could be, crashes. And given that BARC is just next to it and there is a uranium enrichment plant there, we are taking a huge risk. And our petition did say relook at it. But anyway, all of that was overlooked. And today there are drone crashes every week in that area. The local people have completely lost out on everything. And they're just left to die there because there isn't anything for them to do in life. There is no food at the household level. And the same problems of adults and girls getting married very early, child marriage has started, and early childbirth. And we are recreating that problems of maternal mortality, infant mortality, malnutrition, and gender-related issues. That is one part of this, the rural commons. Talking about the urban commons, Bangalore is very famous because all its lakes have been in news. The lakes had been encroached over a period of time since urbanization started in the 60s. See, Bangalore is a city that is 1,000 meters above sea level. The nearest river is about 100 kilometers away. There are no water resources other than these lakes. A civilization depended on these lakes, but Bangalore is also a science city, which is very boastful of all its IT/BT knowledge. But with all that scientific knowledge, we did not pay attention to traditional knowledge. All the lakes were, built over. We have everything on lakes, from stadiums to bus stands to layouts to high-rises to villa complexes. We have everything. And as a result, today, with the kind of rainfall Bangalore is receiving, the city is flooded. And many parts of the city, it's not just the poor, it's also the rich who are affected by it, because all their luxury cars were also floating. So in this context, there was also privatization of lakes that happened in 2002. And we challenged that in the High Court of Karnataka. And the case was registered in 2008. It went on for about 4 years. And in 2012, the High Court of Karnataka gave an excellent judgment. The High Court set up a committee. The committee went around the city of Bangalore, looking at the lakes, talking to the people. See, when we say a city and its lakes, we can only think of recreational aspects. We forget the fact that a city also has communities whose livelihoods are dependent on these lakes. So we have a Dhobi community, we have the fishing community, we have a community that harvests lilies, a whole lot of lilies for all the festivities, for all the temples. So there is a community that depends on these lakes. And then these lakes are supposed to be seasonal. They are not supposed to be perennial. So during the summer months, or once the water line recedes, local communities did grow 1 or 2 crops there, quick crops, So all of this came to a halt when 4 lakes got privatized, and we challenged it. And the High Court came out with this judgment based on the recommendation of the committee that I just mentioned. And the final order did say that all lakes have to be measured, figured out, the borders of the lakes should be figured out, they should be fenced. If there are encroachments, they cannot be thrown out. Alternate land has to be found, proper housing has to be built, and only then they can be evicted from there. So based on that judgment, there is also a best example that I can cite, a Subramanyapura Lake, which had poor communities settled on it. The Karnataka Slum Development Board was brought in, and quarters were built for the poor people, and they were finally evicted from there. And all lakes did get rejuvenated. The 4 lakes which were privatized, the High Court said that since a lot of money has been spent, we will allow these 4 lakes. But we have challenged that at the Supreme Court, and that case is still ongoing. But the important part is the court also said no more privatization of lakes. All water bodies belong to the people, and they cannot be rented, leased, sold. That was a classic case. And we've been following that. We've been like a watchdog, looking at every lake, seeing what kind of work is happening, and immediately bringing it to the attention of the High Court. And now the Karnataka State Legal Services Authority has taken it upon itself to raise awareness at all the district level, the various line departments, to ensure that this particular judgment is implemented in its letter and spirit. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Well, do you want to ask me anything? Or?
Dr. Dangaich has been working for many years in Gujarat and other states, especially in the area of protecting of public lands, wastelands, and how these can be used for proper purposes, economic purposes, if at all they are to be used. And I would like you to focus on that, and especially in the context of what was mentioned about rehabilitation of the homeless, the need for more housing in the country, etc.
Professor Parthasarathy has covered practically all the aspects, and Bhargaviji has, given another perspective, on the urban commons and the way, these are being usurped. The fundamental, behind these kinds of anomalies that we see in the commons is that land happens to be, we're talking about commons lands are supposed to be belong to the public, but the entire control and you may say the custody of these lands is the government. And the government is consisting of, as you know very well, the political class and the bureaucratic class. And commons, therefore, I mean, whatever way you define it is an evolving, the definition, but the public lands or the wastelands and other lands which are being managed or which are being, looked after by the government becomes a very easy prey and very, very easy source for the people who are ruling to take the benefit out of that. And that is the reason all kinds of, activities that are promoted, by the various governments lead them to, or probably propel them to acquire land much more than what is needed and then monetize in one way or the other. To give an example to you, I mean, last year onwards, we are hearing about green hydrogen narrative. All of you must be aware that we are being told that for decarbonization of the economy, we will have to go for green hydrogen. And it has to become a green hydrogen economy. Now, green hydrogen is defined as hydrogen that is produced by electrolysis of water through renewable energy. So you require renewable energy and you require water. And renewable energy means mainly the solar, or you can say wind. So if you want to install solar plants in a very big way, you require large tracts of land. And that has motivated the politicians in power in various states to kind of take control of the wastelands and allocate them to preferred parties. Because the whole approach is that we should go for a kind of a massive centralized economy. And therefore, massive plants for, say, green hydrogen are the ones which are to be put up. So this is the way, the lands are, as a matter of fact, taken by the governments, allocated for designated activities and given to a few at the cost of many. And this, drives me to believe that land footprinting, what every economic activity is called for. In our own country, I don't think there is anybody doing land footprinting. By that I mean, how much land do we require for various economic activities? And once you do that, you can ensure that the commons lands or the public lands, which are to be given for certain economic activities or developmental activities, are correctly and appropriately given in one way or the other. They could be given, say maybe free, they could be given on lease, they can be given, say maybe on a user charge basis. Whatever way you want to do, this is something, say, which is required to be done very, very, say maybe essentially. If that is not done, we are surely going to have, as a matter of fact, useless, or you may say, inflated allocations. That's the first thing that I would like to make, land footprinting. The second point which I would like to make a mention of is wastelands, which are say today supposed to be 17%, and I don't want to get into the categorization, but in my opinion, wastelands are the lands which are probably not put to an economic use at this point of time, but through the use of appropriate technology, through the use of appropriate tools, and by involving the people, many of these wastelands can be converted into very good economic, tools and very good, economic activities. This is something, which is, required to be done. Third, thing, which comes to my mind are large tracts of land which have been taken from the government on one way or the other, or even bought in the private, but which are not being used. These are all good lands, but which are not put to any use for the last 10, 15, 20 years and will not be put to any other use. These are, in my opinion, wasted lands. Wastelands and wasted lands. So wasted lands are there with all kinds of, organizations. You have got, say, trusts, you have got, say, temples, you have got churches, you have got Waqf board, you have got private industries, the government. They are all sitting on large tracts of land which are not put to any use. It's a big drain on the economy. To give an example to you, Government of India in 2014-15 carried out a kind of a survey to find out public sector enterprises, central PAC, central government central government enterprises who are sitting on the land. Government wanted to know what is the quantum of land. Leaving aside railways, leaving aside defense, 10 lakh acres of land are totally unused right now with, say maybe all these, say public sector enterprises. To that you can add, say the state government enterprises and panchayat, and you got a very huge, say figure in my opinion. So, I mean, when we are talking about, say commons, when we are talking about public lands, I should, say not hesitate in saying that using the technology, digitization, and knowing about each and every parcel of land's ownership is something that is possible if it is taken up by the state governments, because the state, subject. This is something which should be the highest priority. Inventorization, ownership, management, the rights, all these things should be defined. That will obviously, say maybe take us to the next step, which is, say to look at the activities in the future, look at the footprinting before each and every activity, and it should come in public domain. So I'll stop here. All that I can say is that commons is indeed something, say which is required to get the attention now, and through, say maybe these appropriate, say maybe tools, we should be able to know who is, say maybe owning, who is managing, how much, and if they are given, then there should be a record, there should be an audit, whether that has been, say maybe, used to that extent or not. So, lot of scope for that, and thank you very much, say for giving me the time. Yeah.
Thanks, Professor Dangaj. I think our moderator is here. I will, yeah, we could not wait because it was getting late. But before I ask you, in case you have any questions, you can then raise it to the panelists. But I would like to go back to our topic, which is the common lands. Where is he? Oh, so come here. I think.
Common space. There was no space that I even
Okay.
Shailendra Tiwari. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can speak from
Do you need this mic?
Tiwari from
Do you need this mic or is there a mic?
Seva Mandir. Sorry.
Okay.
No. It's here. This way.
Okay, yeah.
I
Please.
apologize.
It's not.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be speaking out of my experience as a practitioner working with Seva Mandir. My experiences come out of my work in South Rajasthan and partly of Western Rajasthan. So, we have heard lots of things about commons. But as far as our constitutional laws regarding lands are concerned, at least in the government documents, we don't see any word like commons. So let me put something about how commons are looked at as far as governance is concerned, then what is the ground situation and how Seva Mandir has tried to address the situation as far as development of commons is concerned. So we have Rajasthan Tenancy Act 1955, which mentions all land belong to the state and tenants have to pay revenue to the government. Some lands are set apart which are not under any tenancy are called Bila Naam Sarkar. These are also known as in Hindi Gair Mumkin, Banjar, Sivai Chak, etc. etc. The 1956 settlement it further divides land into that Bila Naam land into three categories, that is forest, which is governed by forest department. We have village pastures, which are under the jurisdiction of panchayat, and third category revenue wasteland under the jurisdiction of revenue department. And these all categories have different user rights. I am not sure about revenue wasteland per se, but these other two categories have something called Van Bandobast, which clearly mention about the people's right about grazing and collection of fuel wood, dried fallen wood, and couple of NTFPs, depending on the kind of forest area. Then pastures are exclusively for the grazing of the livestock. Depending on the number of livestock, each village was assigned this kind of land. Revenue wasteland, we are not sure But still people have grazing rights and collection of usufruct. People used to do it. Now, out of southern Rajasthan, what we have observed, I think it's a bit old data, but still might be valid, or I think the problem have got much more aggravated. Forest land, we found that 26% of the forest was found to be encroached. Almost half of the village pastures were again encroached, and 100% of the revenue wasteland, means there is no revenue wasteland available in the villages where we undertook this study. Though, as far as government is concerned, there have been many attempts, maybe half-heartedly, full-heartedly, but what we observe, government is too remote and least interested in addressing the problem of encroachments. It simply treats land as a physical entity, and the bureaucratic and judicial route which is used to address the problem of removal of encroachment is a durable disaster. Meanwhile, the encroacher gets enough time to prove his encroachment, and it results into a built-in premium in encroachment, and ultimately the rule-abiding citizen suffers while the trespassers are awarded with regularization. Now, if we look at the community is also not very positive. There is minimum demand as far as commons are concerned, and community is divided on the lines of caste, gender, many I think. And on top of it, there is a pattern-client relationship under which people opt for their individual benefits. Any sarpanch or panch, they promise people of regularization of encroachment on the eve of each election. So this further aggravates problem, and it's very difficult to remove the encroachment. And ultimately it leads to overall social enfablement of the communities in which people compromise for the individual interests. Now, what we have tried to address this situation in South Rajasthan to treat land as a social and cultural entity. My friend Sumer Singh is sitting here. So there in his village, commons, Sivaichak lands are being allotted to companies for putting up solar power plants. In other areas also they are getting diverted. But unless and until community, they deal with the situation, and we need to understand the power relations. And we have to follow a policy of persuasion, negotiating with the encroachers, setting up dialogue, investing in this process, which may take time, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But definitely following this process, Seva Mandir has reversed property relations in almost 1,000 villages, where with the help of Seva Mandir, communities have developed this land and they are reaping sustainable benefits out of it. Currently, we have mechanisms under which there is no dearth of money for the development of commons. MG Narega provides huge opportunity for development of pastures, but Panchayat simply wants soil their hand with the problem of encroachment, because again it's a political matter. So there is a role, definite role for civil society organizations to deal with this problem of these power relations related to the land. I'll sum up with one sentence. Actually, I had a long conversation with Dr. Punendu, who is sitting here. So what he told in Hindi, I think, कि ये common रक्त रंजित है या घाव लगे हुए हैं इस पे, और हमने इनके घावों से बहुत कुछ सीखा है. And I think this time when we heal out these common lands out of our experience. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so sorry for being a little late. But to all the panelists, I have a very small question. Though I missed Parthasarathy sir's lecture, but I went through his presentation. We all know that though it is called common, but it is very uncommon to find common land discussion in the entire discussion whenever we talk about land. So what has been in your experience? You talked about challenges, you talked about of encroachment, you talked about government being very apathetic, though there are rules and policies. But anywhere you have seen a glimmer of hope, or any very, very concrete suggestion that you want to come up with to the audience, if common land has to be protected and managed well in this country, which is about 25% of the land mass. For a developing country like India, 25% of land mass is not really very small land mass that we are talking about. So if you have to give one very concrete suggestion, what would it be? Start with Parthasarathy sir.
I would strongly recommend that we need to define the property rights, assuming that we know which are the common lands, which are the public lands. We knew it, but we need to tag it, we need to digitalize it, all that we'll have to do. Having done that, will we be able to put to good use? That depends on the definition of property rights. It is codified in the Act, it is codified in the Constitution everywhere, but and traditionally, but much of it is traditional. Whether it is sacred grove or whether it is water, the first use of water, the use of rights, I think those have to be determined. One of the reasons, I'll stop at this, one of the reasons we couldn't take JFM forward and we couldn't have watershed in the forest areas is precisely because we couldn't agree on the property rights on those areas. So therefore it is critical and essential to define. When we define it, probably we then do it for Gaucha land, for different typologies, from there to the public lands in urban areas. So that's what I would consider very important, ma'am.
I think awareness and engagement with the local government is very important. We might have all the records. For example, in Karnataka, the entire land records were, all set in the Bhumi project. But many people didn't even know that their land was going to go for the Bangalore-Mysore expressway that was built. Of course, it was because of people's resistance. Eventually, only half of it got built. The entire section is not built. But awareness is important and engagement on a daily basis. Otherwise, lands will just get swallowed up.
Commons are the lands that belong to the public. So, if any government wants to encircle, enclose, and give it, say, to anybody for that matter, prior to it, there should be a clear public announcement explaining the reasons for giving it to XYZ. Second point, which is related to this, is that when you want to give commons to some private parties, should it be only for the large companies, or should it be available to all the people who can possibly use and create employment or livelihood in those areas? So instead of focusing only on, let's say, giving it to Tesla or giving it to the Tatas or giving it to Adanis or Ambanis, why not think about the livelihood that others can also create on that particular land, and thereby throw it open to everybody in a transparent manner? If you're looking at, for example, solar parks, should they be created only by very large companies? Or since solar is modular, solar is decentralized, should it not be made available to the entire MSME sector in the country on the same terms as the big companies? So these are the two simple suggestions that I would like to make. Thank you.
So, as Dangayaji mentioned, commons belong to people, but that belongingness somehow is missing among the communities. Because if community is strong and if it puts strongly down, I don't think bureaucracy or polity has any guts to oppose the will of the people. I'll give an example of Jaisalmer, where communities are fighting against the allotment of their own land to Adani. So they have more than 10,000 hectares of own land, and if it is given to, it's a lush green forest. In the government records, it is wasteland. So first of all, that kind of interpretation also needs to change. Similarly, there is a provision. Now, see, in the digital age, we know what is happening with the commons. If we call pastures, there are digital maps on which encroachments have also been mapped. But ultimately, who will take the step forward? Both community first, then the state. Because state will also not do, because it's again political matter. So this complex system, how we are, because it's not, I think, I have any ready-made solution, but I think let's start talking about it. At least first society starts talking about it, polity, bureaucracy, then we all need to, because ultimately the solution will take some time, but a beginning has to be made. Thank you.
No, just a moment. So I think the three questions that are there in the title of this panel discussion, how much, who owns it, and why it should be protected, why it matters. I think the first two, we are in agreement how much the land should be inventorized, should be measured, inventorized, protected. There is no disagreement on that. Who owns it also, as you rightly said, the government owns it. Is it the district collector? Is it the panchayat? Is it the, is it the public sector undertakings? I think that has to be also clearly mentioned. Now, to that, I want to add why it matters. I want to give a bit of a doomsday scenario and say that if we don't protect our public lands, I think a lot of things, a lot of problems that are happening, more and more will happen and they will get more and more aggravated. Just public lands, nothing else. I say this because, as was mentioned, for instance, the urban floods that happen in Chennai, that happen in Bangalore, that even have been now happening in Delhi, in the heart of Delhi, which never happened before, is happening because of the public spaces not being protected, built upon, misused. So whether it is the stormwater drains being filled up, being built upon, even multi-storied buildings coming up over stormwater drains in Bangalore city. So you see, to say that if we hand it over to the authorities or to the people, it will be done well, that's not correct. I think I will go further and say, and I say this because I have had a lot of discussion with my friend Serene here, there is a lack of awareness in our country on protecting the public things, whether it is the public lands or public property, the public buses and trains and government offices. You know, we always behave as if it's nobody's property. That mindset has to change from our younger generation. And I think some of it I see changing when I go and speak in schools and colleges, but it has to change drastically. That's one. Secondly, the reason why public lands have to be protected and used in a proper manner is because public lands are the biggest source of corrupt practices in our country. I don't know if any of you are aware, or if any of you do this exercise. If you open the newspaper every day in our country, any of the national newspapers, you will find some issue connected to a corruption case, and there will be a land matter behind it. I think I'm not wrong in that, and I can say with certainty. So it is necessary, if we want our country to be a properly developed, well-governed country, we have to protect our public lands. I think often we have this attitude, that public lands, it's for everyone, so it will be taken care of by the government. No. That is where transparency is important, and I agree with you totally. And with Professor Dangaich, that we need to make it aware to the people in a transparent manner that these are the lands which are public lands. These are the lands which are owned by this public sector undertaking. And going further, if that public sector undertaking or that authority in the government who's not using that land, there should be a provision set up where those lands should be used for public purposes. I think some of these issues need a lot of mindset change, which I think has to come from our younger generation and, of course, the bureaucrats. I also finally want to mention that it's not the absence of laws. We have too many laws, in fact. Having worked as Revenue Secretary for a record 6.5 years in Kerala, I can tell you there are more laws than we need on protection and management of public lands. But are these laws being executed? Are they being enforced? No, they are not. Why do encroachments happen on government property? Aren't there people managing those lands? Aren't they keeping an eye open to see that encroachments don't happen? No. They are there, but they are not doing their work. And I think they need to be made to do their work. And that is why we need the involvement of the citizens and the kind of work that you are doing. And what you mentioned, that there should be a regular interaction between the government officials and the people, is important. But you know what is also important? That the people should be aware of these rules and regulations in a simple manner. Because often I know when a person approaches a Tahsildar or a Patwari or a village officer, he is made to feel as if you don't understand. That should not happen. He should know more than, or at least as much as the Patwari or the Tahsildar. It's only then that they will learn to listen. And I say it having been on the other side for many, many years. That is the only way that we will learn to listen. That you tell us in our language that why is it that this land was allowed to be encroached and not protected? You see, that kind of questions, these kind of questions have to be raised.
Yeah, so to the question of why it matters in the context of climate change, where we have to shift to those livelihoods which are not connected to the grid. And in a country like India, we don't have factory-farmed animals. These are all free-range sheep rearing and goat rearing and cattle rearing that is happening. So in that context, it is these commons that are going to be helpful to us. The COVID pandemic did teach us that, many people who went back, of course, unfortunately, many didn't make it back home from our cities. But those who made it, it was these livelihoods that sustained them. And pastoral activity, weaving, and a whole lot of other rural livelihoods, the resources are the commons. And these resources are seasonal. So one season, they get that additional income, and that is very important in the context of climate change. Thank you.
Yeah, and a couple of two more points I want to add. One is that, rapid urbanization is happening in our country, and it will continue to happen, and we can't stop it. And often when we talk about public lands, it's made into a, development versus tradition issue. That do you not want the science city to come up? Do you not want Bangalore city to grow? Do you not want youngsters to be exposed to new technology? And on the other hand, it would be done in an area where probably something else was happening. So why do we make it a development versus tradition issue? Rather than that, why do we not solve it in a manner that, it's a win-win? And we are not short of lands. As Dr. Dangaich mentioned, there is so much of wasteland available. As Revenue Commissioner, every month we send a report to the Ministry of Rural Development how much of wasteland is available within my jurisdiction, in my state. And it's thousands and thousands of hectares of land is available as wasteland. Why do we not start building our projects on those lands? Why do we not find ways in which that we don't unseat people who are actually living there for their livelihood? I think that is important. And finally, what is also important is that in a lot of cases, the records are being destroyed. And it is being done in a very surreptitious manner. Even when the digitization has happened, records are being tampered with. I think that is why it is essential that these records and this information is made transparent. Without that, I think we would lose our commons. And I give an example from a place which is known to all of us sitting in this room, the Dal Lake in Srinagar. I happen to have been doing some work there based on a court order, and we found that the main map, the litho map of Dal Lake was missing. So nobody knew what the boundary of the lake was. It was supposed to be 25 point some acres, and actually it was limited at present to only 18 point some acres. And when I asked the question that where is the map, show me the map, they said, wo aag hua tha, usme jal gaya. You see, part of the property, the revenue records were burnt in the fire. How can you allow that to happen? And that is why let's use technology, get it all digitized so that you cannot tamper with it. Because when you leave it open to tampering, there is, anything can be done with the records.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We will have also maybe a round of discussion whether to call any land as waste is justified or not, because I think we're the only country in the world perhaps who calls a parcel of land as waste. No other country calls any parcel of land as waste, because every land has some kind of activity that's going on for some other life form. But to the August gathering here, I would request if any of you have any thoughts, any very concrete recommendation. We all know what's the problem, because I think most of our speakers talked about what's been the problem and challenge with common land. Yes, my friend there. Can I come there?
Yeah, it's a nice session, ma'am. I would like to add some more points here. Actually, these common lands are. Yeah, myself, Madhu. I'm a revenue inspector from Government of Andhra Pradesh.
Hello.
Yeah, but here I just want to add some points. Common lands are the government lands, which are some common lands are vested with Panchayat Raj, and some common lands are vested with government by the revenue department. And within these common lands, some having objectionable lands and some other unobjectionable lands. Those lands which are having objectionable lands, those lands should be, we have to protect those lands. What are having a water bodies and these grazing lands are comes under objectionable lands. Even government is also not having a right to assign those lands to the public. Yeah, already Supreme Court has given one order against that. If already they have assigned, means that is also government can resume that. But these unobjectionable lands means these hills and some other part of government lands. It might be some people are encroaching those lands, and they might be regularization by the governments. But these objectionable lands, I strictly recommended that what the Telangana government doing, that Hydra, in my perspective, that is the right decision. Because I witnessed so many records, madam said, those records are tampered, and in the ground position that water bodies are not existing right now. People are occupying encroaching those lands, and it may root cause to get a floods, and because during the heavy rains and any floods are occurring, that people are very affected in that scenario. Just want to mention. No, common lands are the government lands. But I think even I'm working here for the last 10 years. I didn't found any grazing lands in my jurisdiction. Those grazing lands are objectionable lands. Those are already encroached by some other people. When revenue people also don't know where there is a water bodies and where there is because the existence of that water is not there. Somebody's are encroaching those things. Thank you for this opportunity.
So what my friend said, I am Revision Commissioner of Board of Revenue Odisha. So I hold the highest court, apex court in land. What he said, common lands in Odisha, or what my Rajasthan friend said, it is not defined. Rasta, Hatto, Batto, Ghatto, burial ground, Smosan, Khelapodia, all this Odia language. So it is common. It is not defined. It's not a government, private land. But what Rangarajan said, we started with the tragedy of the commons. Only Elinor Ostrom's theory offers some hope to give some property rights. For example, in the Northeast, it is happening, the land, community leaders, they are grabbing the land, community land. You cannot, Northeast, you don't have common land. So only property right. For example, I was holding a court, 40 acres of land in Bhubaneswar, taken away by Bharat Biotech because it was your land. It was given by Odisha government on medicine during COVID. So how can you change the pasture land to company? But how the hell you will keep the pasture land in your urban area? So diversion. So property right is the offers, madam, only hope. At least we should examine Elena Ostrom kind of theory. Property is not only individual, it is a common property. There is nothing like tragedy common. Still we can have some property right. In Chile also, you know, massive firing, some common property feature rights there. And only common rights would will allow to land acquisition benefits.
Yes, please.
Serene Ho, University of Melbourne. Just a question to all the members of the panel. What do you think of the recent initiative to monetize public lands by the government of India? Just interested in your thoughts.
Will anybody take this question? Why the government of India monetized the public land, if I got it correctly?
You want to take that? We have been discussing it.
Yeah. Well, to be very frank with you, I mean, the government wanted to disinvest in the public sector enterprises. And it is very well known that many of the public sector enterprises are duds at this point of time. They're not doing well. I mean, they're loss making. So they thought that the land that is lying with surplus with them can be monetized and may be used. But that is not really taken off, to be very frank with you. It is not doing all that well on that front.
But that's a big risk, Serene. When you monetize the land, and I will give you an example. Some of these, not many, but some of these central public sector undertakings and private companies are sitting on lands which was acquired under the Land Acquisition Act, which has a provision that if it is not used for the purpose for which it was acquired, it will be given back to the people. Come back to the government, and government will try and give it back to the people. Without doing that, these undertakings and companies were actually trying to sell those lands and use it for purposes like even private housing. HMT tried to do that in Cochin, and we stopped it. We went to court and stopped that. So you see, that is again a danger. Monetizing it for knowing the value is okay. But monetizing it for a company which has no other asset except this is their only valuable asset, they have nothing else, is a dangerous thing.
See, I can quote the example of Ahmedabad recently also. From the public lands, the TP scheme, the town planning scheme, will ensure that 40% of every private land that is to be developed will be given to the land bank. And from the land bank, recently also, in many strategic locations, the Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation and the state government, they have auctioned it. And auctioned it for huge, I mean, you'll be knowing much better. So it goes to around 3.75 lakhs per square meter. What happens is, so monetization takes place. What I was trying to mention is that also signals the price for the private developers to, or the other property owners to, but this is not price discovery mechanism. This is basically auctioning a large chunk in a very centralized location to developers or private houses. So monetization takes place by this way also. I don't think it is only monetization. It also to give price signals. That is more important, and that is more questionable if you ask me.
Anybody else? I know there are a lot of people in the room who has questions. I'll take 1, 2, and this friend. Okay, because we have less time, right? We have only 5 more minutes. So we can take your quickly.
My first question is to panelist Rangarajan. So you were talking about the methodological thing where the denominator shouldn't be the total geographical area, but it should be total available area. So what does it exclude within the village geography? The second question, if I may ask you, it's about, do you think the loss of commons is also a question of infrastructure, particularly in urban areas? Because when we look at cities like Hyderabad and Bangalore, we have a large number of lakes, and our sewage systems are messed up. We don't have a underground, so we are turning our lakes into cesspools by dropping all the drainage into it. So how do you see that? And because it also drops the question dead of things like ecological, because the fish and all these things are dead, and also traditional usage. For example, in Batukamma, in Telangana, they're not able to use the lakes because the lakes have become drainage systems. Yeah.
Yeah, can we take your question also so that we can get the answers
The
together?
mic.
You have the mic? Can you
Yeah.
just try that?
Yeah. My name is David. The way I don't know, we call it David. I'm from Ethiopia. I want to know or to hear from you about this communal land. When we talk about the communal land, at the large scale, it could be grazing land. In some pocket areas, communal forest land is very rare. But the way you give the tenure security on grazing land in India, I want to know or I want to hear from you the way when the public purpose heavy industries, other industries or individuals, when they demand the land around the grazing land or the communal grazing land, the other thing is the way of movement of the pastoralist from area to area, because I'm asking comparing with Ethiopian context. In Ethiopia, we do have the area covered by pastoral area more than 60% of the total land. The way of movement is not restricted in pastoral area. We have tried by the intervention of some international communities, giving the tenure security or certifying the communal grazing land. Because they do have their own customs, traditions, and the values, the way of protecting these grazing areas and the water and the pasture land in Ethiopia. So how do you manage the grazing land in India, and the way of certifying? We are certifying in some areas, in the pocket areas, more than 2 or 3 districts, one certificate commonly. The other alternative is certifying as the village administration level, certifying the pastoral communal grazing land. So how do you manage when the land is demanded for the public purpose, for the sake of the compensation, the community should get the compensation communally for their common purpose. So I want to know all these points.
We got your point, friend. One more question, yeah.
Good morning. I'm Sushmita. We know how digitization in India has been very exclusionary. They've excluded communities that have been traditionally marginalized. Now that we're all in agreement that digitalization of land records is the way to go to manage commons better. So my question is that considering, wouldn't this probably potentially exacerbate existing inequalities? Secondly, if digitalization of land records is going to be the way forward, how can we make this process more inclusive so that there is adequate representation of these communities whose livelihoods depend on these lands? Thank you.
Yes, this is something which was also bothering me. You wanted to ask one question, so that's the final question we're going to take.
It's more an observation than a question, that often what happens is that the type of the open spaces are known, but each type has its own ecosystem. And if we don't plot that boundary or research on that, often they even on their own die out. Just for example, 2 things. If we have water bodies as a public spaces, but if we don't take care of the drainage with which it gets the catchment area, then often this is a systematic disaster that you build all around and there's no catchment available. And as a result, eventually in some time, there'll be no water, We have had in Ahmedabad cases where for 6th century, there've been water bodies around, but last 10 years development, there's no water. It doesn't matter, Ahmedabad would flood, but that would not have water. Same way, the grazing ground, if we don't provide for the grass or whatever for that it is there, then it would eventually die, and then it'll be very convenient to change its use to fill up the water bodies and put it something else. So I think it's not enough to just plot the boundary in terms of map, what it blue or green is about, but I think understanding what really constitutes that as an ecosystem and then making that as available. And just the last, in a very heightened way. Here we are talking about scarcity, but many places, even the visual cone of the natural resource has been maintained, that if there was a site of a mountain or a lake or this, you cannot block that. So I think understanding ecosystem of each of these type and then maintaining that boundary is more relevant.
Thank you. That's a brilliant observation, I must say. It's not just a resource boundary. Yes.
To specifically answer your question, the MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics Program Implementation, which brings out this NSSO data, explains that as an accountable land, not the geographical area. The difference is the following. You have defense areas, you have railways, you have border areas, and you have even estuarine. So some of those areas, you can't really use it for any other purpose than what it is right now. So that is why you need to have the denominator as the accountable area and not geographical. When we use the geographical, you get minuscule numbers sometimes. So that's how it has been defined. And I find that as a statistician and economist, that to be more correct. The rest of the things, what we are talking about is essentially, yes, you digitize, you do everything, but unless you define property rights, sorry for repeating it, you will not be able to do it. An example is, we have the Narmada waters, okay? So that has been defined earlier for what it is, everything is known. It has to reach Kutch, it has to reach somewhere for certain purpose. Now we divert it, we also have a riverfront, we do something else, but who claims the right? If you develop this first, then Ahmedabad, according to our usury rights, we'll have to claim first the riverfront water. Only then it will go for irrigation. Therefore, the property rights in all cases become very, very crucial. Insofar as the grazing lands are concerned, we have very clear definition about what it is meant for. The only problem is that nowhere it is in one chunk of land. It's all in different places, and we call it as different hamlets, so belonging to different castes, everything. So the users and access become very restricted. As a result, the changes in its use, the misuse, however you put it, is very rampant. So therefore, again here we'll have to define for what it is used. The question that you are talking about ecosystem services, I think it is very clear that a lake, for example, Bangalore Lake, which we have done quite a bit of work, is the water body is important, the water is important, so is the area. Something is used for, even in Kankriya, something is used for play area, something is for walking, something is for only for water, fish, fishing, everything. So commons have multiple uses, and we should recognize it as a comprehensive entity. Then you define the rights. Then you will find out different people and different stakeholders having claims on the same property and same area.
Yeah. So to your question of this whole underground drainage system and how it has spoiled our lakes, it was the public sector units that came to Bangalore in the early 1960s who first started off the underground drainage system. Before that, we all had septic tanks. And at some point, they decided to connect it to all the lakes, and that is what, destroyed all the lakes. The city of Bangalore today needs to reimagine this entire underground drainage system. It's a humongous exercise, but it needs to be done because now we are considering supplying our lake waters to all the domestic purposes. And some of this water is also being now pushed into Kolar and other areas as well. So a good example is from Bhubaneswar, where one Mr. Manikantan has done this septic tank system of cleaning sewage water at the ward level. So every ward has its own little septic tank, and they have some compost that comes out of it. And that would probably be the best way for most of our cities to go forward wherever we are dumping it on lakes. And that way our lakes can be completely revived. And the way lakes have been revived today is again ecologically a disaster, because taking his question, lakes had a shallow end and then a deeper end. Today that ecosystem is completely destroyed. We've created what we very unpopularly called the soup bowl model. The soup bowl model, the lakes are not like soup bowls, right? So today we've created these soup bowls, we've taken all the silt and dumped it in the center and created these islands for birds to perch on. And this is largely to keep the urban middle class and upper middle class recreated. So that model again needs to be relooked, but it's going to take a long time because we need to engage with naturalists, ecologists, geologists, a whole lot of people. And do we have that kind of bandwidth in a country like ours? Because given that I'm speaking from experience, the Karnataka town and country planning laws very clearly say what can be done at a street level, but that law is like dumped into the dustbin. So it's a huge exercise, but it can be done if everybody comes together. So that's where, again, the 73rd, 74th Amendment has to be first implemented. And people have to engage with ward committees. And your question, that fear has been on my mind. And again, the Bhumi project did not do a good mapping of all these areas. The poor people's areas were left out. It was not inclusive. They challenged it in the High Court. The cases went on for a very long time. It is a big challenge. There is a lot of, risk there. Thank you.
If I can add your question about the areas which are encroached, especially by the vulnerable people, they cannot remain unmapped. Because if they remain unmapped, that means they are outside the radar. You have to map them. But you also have to find a solution. You can't have a situation like in Mumbai. Now they say that 70% of the population lives in slums. Now, I think that is unacceptable. We cannot do that. I also want to add to some of the questions that were asked. We have something called master plans. Every urban area in our country has a master plan. Urban settlement has a master plan. And that master plan lays down which area will be used for what purpose, which is to be maintained as green, which is for housing, for industry, for public purposes, etc. It's laid down. It's a different matter that this master plan is violated very often. And because that it is violated, the land use is not kept at what it should be. But the master plans, and I say this to a lot of people who would be studying architecture here, master plans are very, very important because as you know, we say by 2035, India would be, half the Indian population would be living in urban centers. Now that is a humongous number of people, and are we prepared for it? To be prepared for it, we need to have proper master plans and we need to enforce them. That is extremely important. You want to add something? Thank you.
Yeah, unfortunately, the organization already said this is time to close. What we all hear today morning from all our esteemed panelists is a couple of recommendations about a common land registry, which is digitized mapping, but also talking about property rights like Sir said, and also bringing in all actors possibly engaged in a common land to be able to define who owns it and why it matters. But in the entire debate discourse, perhaps what we didn't realize, within this room there are Homo sapiens who are talking about it, but on the commons there are other life forms are also dependent. Let's not forget that many of the common grounds also are a ground for other living beings. So whenever we think about why common matters, let's include all the life forms whenever we talk about a commons governance. Thank you so much for the panelists and the chair for being so patient in delivering your lectures, and thank you audience for being so patient in hearing. We look forward to have such discussions in future also.